Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. This evening, I have the opportunity to host John Paul Rodrigues and Justin Rochester. Thank you both so much for taking the time to being here in the podcast. I just want to do a quick introduction here, and then I'll ask you to speak a little more about yourselves, respectively. For JP, he is an award-winning legal instructor and paralegal program coordinator at Trios College. He co-founded the Paralegal Town Hall, forum connecting paralegals, lawyers, educators, and students to discuss the present and future of the profession. He tutors paralegals students for the P1 licensing exam and has featured over 500 legal professionals on his YouTube Justice in Pieces. Beyond legal communication, JP is a lawyer who primarily works as a telephone duty counsel on criminal and immigration matters.
So, Claudia, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on the other side of the microphone answering questions. I know someone who's talked to so many legal professionals like yourself. I think you've been a guest as well on mine. And yeah, I'm involved. It's actually Trios College, but I've been there for 10 plus years, and I've been giving everything I have focused on the paralegal profession and helping paralegals thrive and cultivating those knowledge of the students so they can succeed in the field.
Amazing. It was such a pleasure to be in Justice in Pieces, and I appreciate you being here with us today. I also want to introduce Justin Rochester, who is a licensed paralegal practicing criminal law in Ontario and teaching at multiple colleges with over 9 years of experience and more than 7,000 court appearances. Justin has trained lawyers and paralegals while advocating for clients every day. Thank you so much for being here, Justin.
Thank you so much for having both of us, Claudio. We really appreciate everything you're doing to bring attention to these legal issues and discussions that help further understandings, and that's very important. And yeah, I've been practicing or providing legal services in criminal law for just 10 years now. It's been quite fulfilling. There's not a lot of paralegals in that realm that kind of do what I do, and so it's always great to see new paralegals and join the ranks of criminal practice, for lack of a better term. But yeah, and I teach at multiple colleges, and I co-founded the Paralegal Town Hall alongside my good friend, John Paul Rodrigues.
Amazing. So to start off our interview tonight, I wanted to ask you a little more about the role that paralegals play. I've heard that Ontario has a very specific and unique setting where paralegals can do a little more than they could in other jurisdictions, be it in the US or even in other Canadian provinces. So can you tell me a little more about the role that paralegals play and specifically how this works here in Ontario?
Yeah, for sure. So, we really are like one of the only places in the world that has this secondary licensing. And it's really a beautiful thing because access to justice is realized. We are trained quite well, and we have a strenuous academic journey in order to get licensed. And once we become essentially specialists in our fields. And paralegals are declogging courtrooms. They are making sure individuals who would not normally have representation get representation. Because to be quite frank, the alternative to a paralegal is not a lawyer for most people. It's out of their price range. The alternative is self-representation, which can be quite adverse for them, and just as far as getting the best outcome possible, or even worse, going to jail or a criminal record. So paralegals play a crucial role, and we do things in civil and the tribunals, administrative law. There's a lot of places looking at Ontario, seeing that it works, and thankfully are starting to move their mind towards opening up their legal system to house paralegals in the same way that Ontario does.
Yeah, and I would certainly add, paralegals are independently regulated by the law society. So they're just like lawyers in that they have to go through a regulation process. They got to finish education. They got to pass licensing exams. They got to be of good character. They got to do their CPD requirements. And so when you look at it within their scope, as Justin alluded to, $1,000 limit in small claims court, certain summary conviction offenses or hybrid matters that proceed summarily within criminal law, there are hundreds, if not close to 1,000 different tribunals where, and as well as traffic tickets and other provincial offenses, you can have a paralegal representing the plaintiff in small claims court, and you can have a lawyer representing the defendant, or you can have a paralegal representing an applicant at the Human Rights Tribunal, and you can have a lawyer representing the respondent, right? And they work seamlessly side by side or on opposite sides. Again, we're all legal professionals, and together the two create a complete legal systems or legal services ecosystem that thrives in providing access to justice.
And thank you so much for explaining a little more about how the paralegals really play a very interesting role and how the regulation plays a role in all of that. So I'd love to ask you if you could walk us through a little bit about the types of matters that you regularly handle and explain where maybe a paralegal would even be a best choice for clients.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here as a paralegal. So in the criminal realm, I do a lot of, I would say, assault cases, mischief, theft cases, a lot of domestics. Those tend to be the lion's share. And in this system, the way in which we delineate as far as what paralegals can do is essentially any crime that has a penalty up to 2 years in prison, or 2 years less a day, I should say, in jail, I should say, or $5,000 in fines, ends up being designated summary. And in the summary designation, that's where paralegals can appear. Anything over 2 years of a jail time is considered to be indictable in nature and would require a lawyer. And so there are a swath of what we call hybrid offenses. And that essentially is where the Crown has the prerogative to elect either in summary or indictably, which again, and there's many factors that go into that decision. When Bill C-75 was passed back in 2019, it really expanded the scope of paralegals because it redesignated a large swath of offenses to hybrid by making the jail term, qualifier 2 years less a day. And so it's been an absolute pleasure being able to serve my society and my community and providing legal services to individuals that would not normally have access to justice in this way. And I truly believe that the paralegal, well-educated and well-trained, and regulated paralegal is the true answer to the access to justice question.
Yeah, just to add, actually, just a little anecdote from earlier today. I was picking up a plaque from our trophy place. We have a Golden Gavel Award that we give out to paralegal students. And the person just said, "Oh, you're a lawyer. Maybe you can help me. I have this. I feel like all these conversations start randomly like this." So one of the people that was in the store there. And then they were like, "Oh, but we're going to go to small claims court, and maybe it's going to be too expensive to get a lawyer. That's why I was sending my own demand letters earlier." And I said, "Well, you know what? Actually, I have a great referral for you. It's a paralegal, somebody who can provide you with strong advocacy, strong representation, but at a fraction of what it would cost one of my lawyer colleagues to do small claims work, where often they may pay more money in legal fees than what they're looking to recover, right?" And as Justin alluded before, right, is that you got to find that balance, because the alternative is self-representation. And I was always taught this quote that whoever represents themselves has a fool for a client. And certainly you don't want to go into those battles unarmed. And you can have a paralegal who's affordable, that is well-versed, and especially in those areas where you don't see too many lawyers, that they are going to be very successful for their clients.
Amazing. Yes, I actually had the opportunity to summer in the government, and being in quite a few hearings for the landlord-tenant board, I got to cross paths with quite a bit of paralegals there and learn a little bit more about their role. And honestly, most of the cases that I was at, the other side was very well represented by a paralegal, and I was quite intrigued. So I'm glad to learn a little more about this branch of the profession with you two today. And if I may ask you, kind of plug it into that, are there a few common misconceptions about paralegals, that questions that you get asked, and how do you address them in your work?
So let me jump in here, because I love this question, and I have this term. I call it the Meghan Markle effect. Actually, I was just watching on my Instagram reels when Mike Ross first meets her, and he's like, "Well, everyone just thinks of me as just a paralegal." And so a lot of people have this misconception, because when they hear the word paralegal, they're thinking about Meghan Markle there as Rachel Zane on Suits, or other roles where, again, as Justin said before, we're the only one that has fully licensed representation. We're paralegals. I know British Columbia is almost there. We were talking to some U.S. paralegals recently who were saying, well, they're looking at Arizona and Utah as potentially places. As of right now, Ontario has fully licensed paralegals. So one misconception is that paralegals are just legal assistants or law clerks and that they just do clerical work or support work or assist lawyers at law firms. Again, in Ontario, it's not the case at all. They're fully licensed, as I said before. They're fully regulated. They have education, they have experience, and they work independently. So paralegals can open up their own firms. Paralegals can partner with each other, partner with lawyers even. There's a lot of multi-discipline practices like that where you see lawyers working side by side with paralegals. And as you were asking before, they can take a matter from start to finish, from the arrest in some cases, or from the statement of claim being filed, or from the traffic ticket, right? And they can go all the way through to the end. And so I think that misconception that paralegals are just a paralegal, as Justin had a nice article about, is there's a lot more than simply being assistants or supports. They can do everything a lawyer can do within their scope and do it very effectively.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the idea that there's a lowering of a standard as far as legal representation is somewhat insulting to the individuals that work very hard to ensure that they are capable to do the level of justice that we are entrusted to do. I liken it a lot to the doctor-nurse debate, and that's probably not even much of a debate, but because nurses are actually well regarded and well respected. But there are things that nurses do that doctors themselves are not essentially trained on or don't do so often that they are as good as, for instance, a nurse. Nurse practitioners can do a lot of things, including diagnoses and surface level triage, and so to speak. So paralegals, in my mind, tend to, the debate I'm hearing in BC as well is this idea that lawyers are pushing back, saying, well, licensing paralegals is not truly granting access to justice; it's just lowering the standard of legal representation. And as I said before, it's actually quite insulting to suggest that, because like anything else, we're all people learning our various areas. And once you become an expert or versed in your area, it doesn't, to me, matter whether you're a lawyer or paralegal. For instance, in provincial offenses court or landlord tenant board, there's lawyers who ask, or even in criminal, there's new lawyers who ask me questions about procedure or practices of the court. That doesn't make me see them any less as far as their ability to advocate for the client. It's just I've been doing it for 10 years, so I just tend to have more knowledge in that field. And so that's another misconception that I just wanted to get out of the way, that essentially just because you allow paralegals, or in America, I think it's more of a second tier licensee idea, junior lawyer, I think they're trying to call it, that you're lowering some sort of bar. And I just don't agree with that. And I push back against that wholeheartedly.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I really like the idea of bringing the light to the subject and really sharing it out in the profession, the possibilities. And I think that it's even an interesting point where, it's a different kind of education. It's a different really path to pursue. But I wanted to ask you a little bit, JP and Justin, what made you choose, to in JP's case, to work and stay committed to paralegals, and then Justin, in this work that you've done for quite a few years now?
Yeah, so for me, again, I've had the benefit, obviously, I went to law school, and immediately after law school, I was teaching law in China, actually. So I got the experience of teaching in a law school, and some of my students went on to be, I think, judges and lawyers there. And so I had this experience, and I wanted to come back. And as you know, you either have to be a practitioner with many years, you got to have a PhD. I mean, the qualifications to work in a law school or a university here were a lot more than I was prepared to, especially after taking a few years out after law school. And so there was an opportunity to get involved at a paralegal college. For me, again, as Justin said, the education is very practical, right? And that's very different from law school. I was reading an article on LinkedIn. I think his name is Aaron Beyer, who was writing, do you really learn to be a lawyer in law school, or do you learn it from sort of hands-on training, in your summers and your articling? I mean, I teach contract law, for example, at Paralegal College, and we actually look through, the terms of a contract and how you would interpret it. But, when I was in law school, I mean, contract law was, Lee and Baxendale and all these cases. But I don't think we ever actually broke down a contract, right? We were very focused on the theoretical. And so that's why when people are comparing, well, I went to university, I went to law school, I wrote the LSATs, I wrote all these exams, highly qualified, and then as you're in front of played off at paralegals because they don't have all that, that they're suddenly inferior or less qualified. I mean, you learn on the job, you learn in the experience, and that's why there are paralegal students of mine who are internationally trained lawyers, for example. Those paralegals who've been practicing for almost 2 decades that are well versed and can run circles around any lawyer that comes into their domain, right? And so I think it's very unfair to characterize education as simply the be all and end all, right? And I think when you look at that, why I wanted to get involved was there was an opportunity really to grow and cultivate students who are fresh into the profession or about to enter the profession and sort of give all that I can. And it's, again, when you look at, as a lawyer, often I'm asked, well, you're a lawyer, why are you helping paralegals? Or why do you care about paralegals? But I think both professions can work side by side. I mean, that's the goal, right? Is that we need more lawyers, younger lawyers, newly licensed lawyers, to know that paralegals are competent, they are educated, they're knowledgeable, and they can do work with you, especially in situations where it may have been referred out of the firm. And so for me, I think I take up that cause as a lawyer in the paralegal space. One of the few perhaps really strongly advocating, because we need more lawyers like myself to recognize what paralegals bring to the table, because too often many of my colleagues are pushing back and raising sort of unfounded concerns that they're watering down the profession. So you got to have allies that stand side by side proudly with paralegals, and that's why I'm doing it. And that's why I think working with Justin as the paralegal town hall and having a lawyer and a paralegal side by side shows exactly what this profession is capable of doing.
Yeah, what he said times two for me. But no, seriously, I got into this. I always wanted to do something in the law since I was young. And people, much like many lawyers, their backstory is everybody used to say you should become a lawyer because you love to argue or ask so many questions. And that's the same tagline for me much of my life. But then I decided to get into a lot more trouble than I should have as a youth. And thankfully, I didn't do everything in my power to ruin my life like I had tried to do in my teen years. And one day I was working, continuous construction jobs, or I was working in factories, and I started doing a night shift, and it was just the absolute worst. And I just truly felt like my potential was being wasted. And I checked the mail, and lo and behold, there was a flyer there for a program called Second Career, one of the few government programs that work. And it felt like it was tailored to me. But, is your name Justin? Do you hate your life right now? Do you wish you did better? And I was kind of like, yep. It's one of those things where I entered, I tried, I applied, and I just kept waiting for the shoe to fall and for me to kind of be blunted and stopped in what I was trying to do. And it just kept going forward. And next thing you knew, I was licensed. And in that, I found great honor in this practice. I found calling, and it's about access to justice. And then through that calling and meeting, John Paul and doing teaching, a second calling arose in me, which was to educate the profession so those entering the field could be armed with knowledge. Because one of the things that I like to emphasize is that feeling that you get once you understand something, that aha moment or that relief. And if I can provide that to individuals as far as their understanding of procedure or process or how the area of law works, then I'm doing something far greater than just for myself, but for that person and whoever that person ends up representing. So that ends up having long-lasting effects on society. And so the access to justice component became a secondary but just as important call for me. And the paralegal town hall allows for us to do that. As JP said, it's a lawyer and a paralegal coming together and using common sense to solve issues and address areas that are lacking, and do so in a way that people tend to, or have, I should say, thankfully and humbly gravitate towards.
Very interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing a little more about your journey to get here too. But I wanted to ask you what challenges paralegals face in the profession today. And considering that you both have been in the profession for quite a bit now, I also wanted to ask you if you've noticed over the years, if things, got better, if there's a few things that are getting harder, or most things are, in a way, being seen more positively. So what's your take on that?
So, I mean, look, I started out 10 years ago. This profession is about 20 years old next year. Essentially, I started at the halfway point. So I had a very, I would say, important seat at this table where I got to see where it had come to, and then where it has gone now. And there's been a great shift in respect for paralegals, especially in the criminal court system where they're not well represented. It took a long time to get enough respect, but that also takes showing up, being there, people knowing that you do the work, and then doing the work well. So when people think back on or remember or reflect on the work you've done, it's in a positive way, which allows for the other paralegal behind you to be perceived that way as well. And even when I first started, quick story, a judge was like, essentially lawyers file what's called a designation, which allows their client to designate them to appear in court on their behalf when the matter is elected to be indictable. Because usually, if it's a summary offense, individuals can just appear on the strength of what's called an agent or an agency of the court. And the judge was mistaken in asserting that I didn't have the ability to appear on pursuant to the designation on behalf of counsel for the client. But at that point, I had a choice. I could either argue and become combative, or I could assert myself and then respectfully, bow to the king essentially. And I did the latter. And thankfully, about a week later, I happened to be before him again, and he stopped what he was doing in the middle of his trial, and he apologized for being misinformed. And I thought to myself that day, it's a great lesson in the cause and effect of our actions. If I were to have acted or responded in a way that was combative, he would never went home and double checked or did the homework and figured out that he was mistaken, which doesn't just benefit me, it benefits every paralegal after me, and every judge that he speaks to afterwards will be informed of the exact same thing. So that cause and effect, that butterfly effect, is very important. And so I've watched the growth of it being from feeling like, and this, I'll speak to the first point of your question. I would find one of the hardest things is the imposter syndrome aspect of it. We all feel like the kid brother of the lawyer walking into court, or the little cousin, or whatever it is. And I'm here to help individuals find and orient themselves in a way that they no longer have that feeling of second guessing themselves or wondering if they belong here, because the answer is that they do belong here and they should not second guess themselves. And the imposter syndrome is normal. Even lawyers sometimes get it. And I would say more often than sometimes, probably a lot more times than many would admit. But paralegals just need to get over the fact that the old paralegals that built what they built, the new era of paralegals are doing 4-year programs, for instance, at Humber, or are undergraduates, or are using this as a way to get their bearings before they enter law school. So it's a whole different caliber of paralegal entering the fray now, and that's exactly who we represent.
Yeah, and again, I think the biggest challenge still remains public awareness. As I said before, many people still don't fully understand when and why they should hire a paralegal compared to a lawyer, and many lawyers themselves don't necessarily understand what paralegals can do, right? And so the challenge there, and as Justin said, there's been certainly strides made over the last 10 years that he's been in the profession. And we think that gap is getting smaller and smaller, where you realize, again, these are highly educated, highly trained individuals. And so the best strategy forward to overcome this is continuing education, further collaboration between legal professionals, and more public outreach, right? I mean, you should see more awareness of what paralegals can do. Or as we have a phrase, that there's a paralegal for them. Because a lot of lawyers who've been practicing for 25 years or 30 years, right, when they hear the word paralegal, they think of the uneducated, no experience. I mean, back then, paralegals could just open up a business and start representing people on traffic tickets with no education, no insurance, no real experience. And we've certainly come a long way in 2 decades from that. And continuing to build on that will only break down further barriers for successful paralegals like Mr. Rochester here and others to continue to move the profession forward.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing those. For those interested in becoming paralegals, what are some of the skills or experiences that you think are most important to succeed in this profession?
I would say communication is huge, right? I mean, the number one complaint of lawyers and paralegals is communication, right? It's not about competence. It's not about not knowing case law, or AI generated hallucinatory law, or whatever it may be. It's about communication. And so being able to explain these complex legal ideas clearly to clients is quintessential, right? Attention to detail, having strong advocacy skills, empathy, right? I mean, it's some, be trauma-informed paralegaling or trauma-informed lawyering, right, are also critical, because many clients are going through these stressful situations when they seek legal help. And so you're putting on a bunch of different hats, right? You're putting on the legal advocate hat, you're putting on the communications hat there, you're putting the social worker hat sometimes. And so you got to be able to do all of that. And the sort of biggest takeaway there is how you communicate that, the right tone, the right words, the right mix of all of that, so you are firm but fair and effective in getting the job done for your clients.
Yeah, and everything JP said exactly right. But I would say at the crux of all that, at the top of all that, is the idea of just being mature, taking yourself seriously. One of the things I try to impart on my students is the minute you start taking yourself seriously, the better the chance of success is. This is a serious endeavor. It's a people-based service. Individuals are paying you and relying on you at very multiple times in their life. And it doesn't matter if it's a small claims matter, because if somebody loses, they could A, not regain damages that they have incurred, or B, be subject to damages to be paid. And that's thousands and thousands of dollars, which could financially ruin them. If it's a landlord and tenant matter, somebody could be the subject of an eviction, or somebody could not get their home back who put a lot of money into it. On the other end, it's a landlord or representative of the landlord. For criminal I think the stakes are pretty obvious. So you just always, in my mind, need to remember that this is a profession, that you are entering a licensed profession, and one that is unique in the world. It's one of those no pressure, right? In reality, we really are the testing ground. We are the guinea pigs for this thing called the experiment of paralegals.
Much appreciated learning a little bit more about what you'd consider good skills. And it's interesting because I feel like in many ways it's very similar to what someone who's going through law school would need to succeed. So it makes a lot of sense. And looking ahead, I'm curious, how do you see the role of paralegals evolving? Maybe here in Ontario, where you already have those privileges, in other areas, as you mentioned, a few US states are possibly going to test it out. So over the next 5-10 years, and maybe what excites you most about this future?
Yeah, I mean, as far like people don't realize, and a lot of paralegals don't realize the actual scope of our scope. It's actually quite well represented, and I think Ontario has a nice balance here. Sure, a few things could be refined, a few things could be worked on, and a few minor expansions. I would say maybe in the civil, putting it up to $100,000 seems appropriate to me. Certain things in criminal, just like minor tweaks. I think after that, I think we are the standard model. It makes sense that we operate within the scope that we have currently. I think it's well representative of the level of training and education that we get. As far as this idea, this experiment spreading across the globe, I think the proof's in the pudding. I just did a discussion with a South Korean think tank where I was able to open their eyes to this idea. And as long as there's people like John Paul, yourself, for instance, myself, we're out here advocating or giving a platform for the advocacy of the idea of this paralegal experiment, I feel like the more the world will benefit, because again, the justice system is one of the strongest pillars of a society. When the justice system falters, that pillar falters, and it's usually one of the first things to go when a society is crumbling. And I'm not trying to be dramatic here. It's a fact. It's history. You just have to look it up. So I find that paralegals answer a question that has been asked for a long time, and that is, how can the common man have access and have fair justice? And I think the paralegal is the answer to that.
Right, and to add to that, I mean, one of our colleagues, Sawyer Kemp, had this post a few days ago. The word paralegal comes from the Greek para, meaning beside. Right, it's not about replacement. It's not about dilution. It means operating alongside. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years in Ontario, you're going to have, again, more and more lawyers like yourself. You're almost, they're getting called Claudio, so excited for you, but they're going to see that they're working in a legal landscape where there are paralegals and there are lawyers, both on opposite sides or on the same side, assisting clients and providing legal services. And we're going to also see other jurisdictions like in BC, like in Alberta, like in various US states and around the world, right? I mean, this podcast is studying law around the world, right? I mean, people are going to see, well, can we find a way to get from university to providing legal services where it's not an 8, 9, 10-year process where it's very expensive and the average person can't afford that, in different places around the world. When I was in high school, if you wanted to be, for me, it was Johnny Cochran, the O.J. Simpson trial, but if you wanted to be a lawyer, right, you had to go to university. You took a political science program, and then you did law school and articling, and it's an 8, 9-year commitment. But when I go and talk to high school students, I say, well, what about being a paralegal, right? I mean, you could go to a program in 1 to 2 years, and if you have those skills and you learn more about the law and you develop that, you can be there in as little as 2 years, right? I mean, in terms of finishing a program, passing your licensing exams, and then learning on the job under, we have the coach and advisor network, for example, with the Law Society, that's where you're going to learn those skills, right? And so the future, again, is paralegals are going to continue to grow. The legal system is focused on access to justice, and paralegals have a key role and will continue to play that key role in making those legal services approachable and affordable. And what really excites me is, like Justin and myself, we have this collaboration between lawyers and paralegals that will build that ecosystem that's going to work better for the public, so you can have everything and be able to afford it. It's not dilution, it's working side by side.
Fantastic. I wanted to thank you both for taking the time to be in the podcast today and for sharing very, very informative information of really the importance of paralegals to the profession and really what you do and how you go about it. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Claudio, for having us. It's always great. It's nice to be able to talk and not just ask questions as well. And I think it's really important that, all your listeners and those around the world, right? I mean, they may see that there is a future where you can have paralegals providing legal services wherever. Again, as long as you're getting the proper training, the education like we have here in Ontario, I think the sky's the limit. And I'm really proud to be able to work alongside exceptional people in the profession like Mr. Rochester and many others. And I thank you again for taking the time to chat with us today.
And I'll echo my friend's sentiment there. Obviously, it's an honor and a privilege to work alongside Mr. Rodrigues as we traverse this landscape and try to be essentially a beacon for the idea of the acceptance and full immersion of paralegals into the legal field. But also yourself, Claudio. I think things like this, these types of podcasts, these types of discussions are important because the law is what society has. That's the way it protects itself from the government. That's the way it protects itself from collapse. And the rule of law is quite important. And platforms like yourself that give voice to these discussions are vital for that endeavor. So thank you, sir, for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to say for any paralegals or paralegal students or any legal professionals interested, be sure to check out the Paralegal Town Hall at the paralegaltownhall.ca there. And we're very happy to provide services and help build on the knowledge and CPDs and events and everything that we're doing.